Night training exercise, the camp silent except for footsteps and heavy breathing. A group of male recruits laughed mockingly as they watched the smallest girl in the platoon stumble and fall during the heavy pack exercise. "She doesn't belong here. Send her home." The mocking laughter echoed through the darkness. She didn't respond, just tightened her pack straps and stood up. But when she reached the final checkpoint, her sweat-soaked shirt clung to her back, revealing a mysterious military insignia tattoo that made the commander freeze in place. No more laughter rang out, only heavy silence. Where are you watching this video from? What would be your first emotion if you found yourself in this situation? Share your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe to continue this story together. Elena Marcus was 23 years old and had mastered the art of being invisible. At Fort Benning, she moved through each day like a shadow. Small-framed with black hair braided tight, her sun-weathered face revealed nothing of what lay beneath the surface. Every morning in the mess hall, she ate quickly and quietly, always choosing a table in the back corner where conversations happened around her, but never included her. The other recruits had made up their minds about her within the first week. "Just a girl playing soldier," they'd whisper loud enough for her to hear. "She won't last 2 weeks," another would add with certainty. The humiliation came in small, daily doses. While the men were assigned weapons maintenance and tactical training, Elena found herself hauling water buckets and scrubbing equipment. During marches, when her shorter stride caused her to fall behind the formation, the drill instructors would use her as an example of inadequacy. "Marquez, if you can't keep up with the pace, maybe you should reconsider your career choices." The laughter that followed these moments burned more than any physical training ever could. During physical training, when she struggled to meet the male push-up standards, the snickers were audible. "Maybe they should have different requirements for girl," someone would mutter, and the implied weakness in those words followed her like a shadow. But there were moments, small moments, that didn't fit the narrative they'd created about her. During map reading exercises, when the entire platoon was struggling with coordinate grids, Elena was the only one who noticed the training map had a printing error in the grid system. She mentioned it quietly to the instructor, who verified her observation and corrected the exercise for everyone. The platoon benefited from her sharp eye, but they attributed it to luck rather than skill. In weapons training, during her first qualification shoot, Elena's rounds grouped so tightly around the bullseye that the range instructor had to examine the target twice to believe it. The other recruits watched in stunned silence, then quickly dismissed it as beginner's luck. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day," someone muttered. But at night, when the barracks were quiet and others were writing letters home or playing cards, Elena would sit alone on her bunk. Sometimes her hand would drift to her back, touching something beneath her shirt, and her expression would change to something deeper, more complex than the mask she wore during the day. She never spoke about her past, never mentioned family or home. When others shared stories about their reasons for enlisting, Elena would listen politely but contribute nothing of her own experience. The drill instructors began to see her as a problem recruit, not because she was defiant or undisciplined, but because she seemed to exist in a space separate from the unit cohesion they were trying to build. "Marquez operates like she's got some kind of secret," Drill Sergeant Williams observed to his colleagues. "Makes me wonder what she's hiding." That wondering would be answered sooner than anyone expected. The night field training exercise was designed to push recruits to their physical and mental limits. Heavy packs, uncertain terrain, navigating by compass in complete darkness. Elena had been struggling with the weight, her smaller frame working harder than the men around her to maintain pace. When she stumbled over a hidden route and went down hard, the pack's weight driving her face first into the dirt, the laughter erupted immediately. "There she goes! I told you she wouldn't make it. She doesn't belong here. Send her home." Elena lay there for a moment, tasting dirt and frustration, listening to the cruel laughter echo through the trees. Then she pushed herself up, adjusted her pack, and kept walking. But when she reached the checkpoint, sweat had soaked through her olive-drab t-shirt, and the fabric clung to her back like a second skin. In the harsh glare of the checkpoint's floodlight, something became visible that changed everything. A tattoo. Not just any tattoo, but a military unit insignia that made Lieutenant Parker's clipboard fall from his hands. The laughter died immediately, replaced by the kind of silence that comes when everything you thought you knew suddenly shifts beneath your feet. The breach simulation exercise was designed to separate the capable from the hopeless. A locked steel container sat in the center of the training yard, and recruits had to work as teams to gain entry using only basic tools. For 30 minutes, the male recruits had hammered, pried, and sworn at the lock mechanism while Elena sat quietly in the shade, watching their increasingly frustrated attempts. "This is impossible," one of them finally declared, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe we need to think about this differently," another suggested. But their techniques remained the same. Brute force applied without finesse. That's when Elena stood up. She didn't ask permission, didn't announce her intentions. She simply walked to the container, knelt beside the lock, and examined it for perhaps 10 seconds. Then her fingers went to work. The lock clicked open in less than 15 seconds. The silence that followed was profound. 37 recruits stared at the small woman who had just accomplished what they'd failed to do in half an hour. "Where the hell did you learn that?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez whispered, more to himself than to Elena. She simply stood up, dusted off her knees, and stepped back without a word. But the questions had started, and they weren't going to stop. The next exercise involved smoke grenades in simulated combat conditions. The scenario called for the team to navigate through zero visibility conditions to reach an extraction point. When the smoke deployed, chaos erupted. Recruits stumbled into each other, called out confused directions, and generally proved that panic was their first response to adversity. Elena disappeared into the smoke like she'd been swallowed by it, but then, through the gray haze, came a series of hand signals. Clear, precise, professional signals that cut through the confusion like a knife. One by one, the lost recruits began following the signals. Elena had positioned herself at the center of their formation and was directing traffic with the calm precision of someone who had done this before. Many times before. "Follow my lead," her signals communicated. "Stay low, stay quiet, stay together." The team that emerged from the smoke exercise was organized, efficient, and successful. But more importantly, they were looking at Elena Marquez with entirely new eyes. Training instructor Captain Hayes pulled Lieutenant Parker aside after the exercise. "That recruit of yours, Marquez, she moves like someone who's done this before." Parker nodded grimly. "I've been wondering the same thing. You think she's prior service? Maybe transferred from another branch?" "I think," Parker said slowly, "that we don't know nearly enough about Private Elena Marquez." That evening in the mess hall, conversations were different. Instead of the usual crude jokes and bragging about home conquests, discussions centered around a single question. Who was she really? Did you see how fast she picked that lock? And those hand signals. Where does a civilian learn tactical hand signals? Maybe she's not a civilian. The speculation grew with each retelling, but Elena remained as quiet and unassuming as ever. She ate her meal alone, cleaned her tray, and disappeared back to the barracks without engaging in any of the conversations swirling around her. But something had fundamentally shifted in the group dynamic. The easy dismissal was gone, replaced by a wary curiosity that Elena could feel, but chose not to acknowledge. Later that night, as she sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle, Private Johnson approached hesitantly. "Marquez," she looked up without speaking. "That thing you did today, with the lock, that was pretty impressive." Elena nodded once and returned to her weapon maintenance. "Could you, if you get time, could you show me how you did that?" For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Elena almost smiled. "Maybe," she said quietly. It was the longest conversation she'd had with another recruit since basic training began. But Johnson wasn't the only one paying attention now. From across the barracks, other recruits were watching the interaction with interest. The girl they'd written off as weak and unsuitable was demonstrating skills that none of them possessed. Drill Sergeant Williams had also noticed the change in dynamics. During his evening report to the training cadre, he mentioned the unusual developments. "The Marquez situation is getting interesting, sir. The other recruits are starting to look at her differently." Lieutenant Parker leaned back in his chair. "How so?" "They're starting to respect her. And that tattoo you mentioned seeing, I think we need to do some background checking." Parker had been thinking the same thing. The unit insignia on Elena's back wasn't just any military symbol. It was specific, recognizable, and it belonged to a unit that didn't typically recruit women. More importantly, it was a unit that had suffered significant casualties in recent overseas operations. "Pull her file," Parker ordered. "Full background check. I want to know everything about Elena Marquez before tomorrow's training exercises." Because something told him that what they'd seen so far was just the beginning. And in a program designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as soldiers, Elena Marquez was showing signs that she might have been a soldier all along. Lieutenant Parker found Elena in the armory after evening chow, methodically disassembling and cleaning her weapon with the kind of precision that spoke of countless repetitions. "Marquez!" She looked up, her dark eyes unreadable. "I need to talk to you. My office, 2100 hours." Elena nodded and returned to her rifle maintenance without asking questions. That lack of curiosity was telling in itself. Most recruits would have demanded to know what they'd done wrong. At exactly 2100 hours, Elena knocked on Parker's office door. "Enter." She stepped inside, moved to the center of the room, and stood at attention. Parker gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Marquez." Elena remained standing. "Permission to remain at attention, sir." "Permission denied. Sit." She sat, back straight, hands on her knees, eyes focused on a point just over Parker's left shoulder. Parker opened a file folder and spread several documents across his desk. Military records, background checks, and at the center, a photograph that made Elena's carefully controlled expression flicker for just a moment. The photograph showed a man in dress blues, ribbons covering the left side of his chest, sergeant stripes crisp and proud. The resemblance to Elena was unmistakable. "Sergeant First Class Hector Marquez," Parker said quietly. 82nd Airborne Division. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. Elena's hands remained steady, but something shifted in her breathing. KIA, September 15, 2021. Improvised explosive device during a reconnaissance mission outside Kabul. Parker closed the file and leaned back. "Your father." It wasn't a question. Elena's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. The tattoo on your back is his unit insignia." "Yes, sir. Given to you before his final deployment." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Parker pulled out another document. "Your academic records show acceptance to West Point, deferred twice. Infantry Officer Candidate School, applications submitted and withdrawn. Finally, enlistment as a basic recruit at Fort Benning." He studied her face, looking for answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. "Help me understand something, Marquez. You had a congressional appointment to West Point. You could have been commissioned as a second lieutenant, following directly in your father's footsteps. Instead, you're here, getting treated like every other 18-year-old recruit who doesn't know which end of a rifle to hold." Elena's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "Sir, I didn't want to be handed anything because of who my father was." "So you decided to earn it the hard way." "I decided to earn it the only way that mattered to me." "Sir," Parker understood. In a military culture that sometimes struggled with nepotism and family connections, Elena had chosen the most difficult path possible. She'd abandoned every advantage her father's reputation could have provided and started from absolute zero. "The advanced tactical knowledge you've been displaying?" "My father trained me, sir. Every summer from age 12 until he deployed for the last time. Said if I was going to follow him into the military, I needed to understand what that really meant." "And the lockpicking?" For the first time, Elena almost smiled. "Dad said a good soldier needs to know how to get into places they're not supposed to be." Parker leaned forward. "The other recruits don't know." "No, sir, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." "Why?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, every time someone finds out who my father was, they start treating me differently. Either they expect me to be exactly like him, or they assume I got where I am because of him. Both of those things are wrong, and both of them make it impossible for me to succeed or fail based on my own merit." Parker nodded slowly. It was a mature perspective from someone who could have easily traded on her father's heroic reputation. Your father would be proud of the choice you made. Elena's composure slipped again, and for just a moment, Parker saw not a hardened recruit, but a young woman carrying the weight of enormous loss. I hope so, sir. But hiding your capabilities isn't helping anyone, Marquez. Today's exercises prove that. Your skills could benefit the entire platoon. Sir, I'm not trying to hide my capabilities. I'm trying to find out what they really are without everyone else's expectations getting in the way. Parker closed the files and looked directly at Elena. Fair enough. But understand something. You've already proven yourself to this unit, not because of who your father was, but because of who you are. The respect you're earning from the other recruits isn't based on your name or your connections. It's based on your actions. Elena nodded, processing this. Permission to ask a question. Sir? Go ahead. Are you going to tell them? Parker considered this. That's not my decision to make, Marquez. When you're ready for them to know, they'll know. But they're already starting to figure out that you're not just another recruit. Elena stood to leave, then paused at the door. Sir, my father always said that the best leaders are the ones who don't need to tell people they're leaders. They just lead. After she left, Parker sat alone in his office, thinking about legacy and sacrifice, about young people carrying burdens that would crush most adults. Elena Marquez wasn't trying to live up to her father's reputation. She was trying to build her own, one difficult day at a time. And from what Parker had observed, she was succeeding. The change didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. The morning after Elena's lockpicking demonstration, Private Johnson saved a seat for her at breakfast. When she approached the table with her tray, the usual pattern of conversation stopping didn't happen. Instead, Johnson moved over and made room. Morning, Marquez. Morning. It was a small interaction, but others noticed. Elena was no longer eating alone by default. During the afternoon tactical exercise, when Drill Sergeant Williams asked for volunteers to demonstrate proper cover and concealment techniques, the usual hands went up. But when Elena raised her hand, Williams nodded immediately. Marquez, show them how it's done. She moved through the exercise with fluid precision, using terrain and shadows in ways that made her nearly invisible, even when the observers knew where to look. How the hell does she do that? Private Stevens whispered to his neighbor. Some people just have it, came the reply. But Elena heard the shift in tone. They weren't dismissing her anymore. That evening in the barracks, when the usual weapon cleaning session began, Elena found herself surrounded by other recruits asking questions. Marquez, what's the best way to maintain sight alignment in low-light conditions? Can you show me how you field-stripped your rifle so fast this morning? She answered quietly, demonstrating techniques with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted others to succeed. Private Rodriguez, who had been one of her harshest critics during the first weeks of training, approached with his rifle in pieces. I think I messed something up, he admitted sheepishly. Elena examined the weapon, identified the problem, and helped him reassemble it correctly. Thanks, Rodriguez said, and for the first time, his tone held genuine respect rather than grudging tolerance. The real test came during the next field exercise, when the platoon faced a complex navigation problem that had stumped their team leaders. Drill Sergeant Williams looked around the group and asked, Anyone have ideas? The barracks fell silent for a moment. Then, without prompting from Williams, every head turned toward Elena. She looked surprised by the attention, but stepped forward to examine the map and compass bearing. If we approach from the northeast instead of direct route, we can use this ridgeline for cover and cut our exposure time in half, she said, tracing the route with her finger. The team leader, Private Martinez, studied her suggestion and nodded. That's actually brilliant. They followed Elena's route recommendation, and the exercise that was supposed to take 4 hours was completed in 2.5, with no exposure to enemy observation. Williams made a note in his evaluation book, but more importantly, the other recruits made their own mental notes about whose advice was worth seeking. By the end of the week, something fundamental had shifted in the platoon dynamics. Elena wasn't being treated as an outsider anymore. She wasn't being coddled or given special consideration. She was being treated as a competent member of the team. When equipment needed to be distributed, someone would automatically include her in the planning. When duties were assigned, her capabilities were factored into the decision-making process. The transformation was noticed by the training cadre as well. The Marquez situation has resolved itself, Williams reported during the weekly assessment meeting. How so? Parker asked. She's become integral to the platoon's success, not because we assigned her a leadership role, but because the other recruits naturally started looking to her for expertise. Parker smiled slightly. And she's handling the attention how? Same as always. Quiet, professional, focused on the mission. But she's not hiding her capabilities anymore. The most telling moment came during a late-night barracks conversation, when Private Johnson was struggling with homesickness and doubt about his ability to complete training. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this, he confided to the group. It was Elena who responded. Everyone questions whether they belong here. The difference between succeeding and failing is what you do with those doubts. The barracks fell quiet, absorbing the wisdom in those words. Later, as lights were turned out and the day shifted into night, someone whispered in the darkness, "If she's here, we're going to be okay." Elena pretended not to hear, but the words settled around her like a blanket. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she belonged. Elena never announced her heritage, never claimed her father's name, or demanded recognition for his service. But somehow word began to spread. It started small, a conversation between drill instructors, a comment from someone who had recognized the unit insignia on her back. Military communities are small, and stories travel faster than official communications. When other training platoons began hearing about Marquez's daughter, Elena felt the familiar weight of expectations settling around her shoulders. But this time was different. Instead of the burden she'd always feared, she found herself becoming something she'd never expected, a symbol of quiet strength. During a particularly brutal training week, when 3 recruits were considering dropping out, Elena noticed their struggle without being asked. She started leaving extra energy bars in their gear, offered to help with equipment maintenance, and provided encouragement without making it seem like charity. "She doesn't make a big deal about helping," Private Stevens observed to his bunkmate. "She just does it." When the base chaplain visited the training company, he mentioned to Lieutenant Parker that several recruits had talked to him about a soldier who exemplified what they hoped to become. "They keep talking about someone who leads by example rather than by authority," the chaplain reported. "Someone who makes them want to be better soldiers." Parker knew exactly who they meant. The unofficial recognition came in small ways. Someone started leaving an extra cup of coffee by Elena's place in the mess hall each morning. When new equipment was distributed, the best gear somehow found its way to her without anyone taking credit for the arrangement. During particularly challenging training exercises, other platoons would ask, "Is Marquez with you guys?" as if her presence provided some kind of advantage. Elena remained steadfastly humble about the attention, but she couldn't ignore the impact she was having on others. One evening, she found a small wooden plaque that someone had placed on her footlocker. It read, "The shadow of Marquez, still walking with us." She stared at it for a long moment, touching the engraved words with fingers that weren't quite steady. Private Johnson appeared beside her bunk. "We all chipped in for that. Hope you don't mind." Elena looked around the barracks and realized that every other recruit was watching her reaction. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because," Johnson said simply, "you remind us why we're here, not for the glory or the benefits, or because we didn't have anywhere else to go. You're here because this matters. And that makes it matter for all of us." Rodriguez nodded from across the aisle. "You never act like you're better than us, even though you probably are." "I'm not better than anyone," Elena protested. "Maybe not," Stephen said, "but you're what we're all trying to become." Elena sat on her bunk holding the plaque, feeling the weight of their expectations and their respect in equal measure. "My father always told me that the best way to honor a legacy is to build your own," she said finally. "I'm not trying to be him. I'm trying to be the soldier he trained me to be." "And what kind of soldier is that?" Martinez asked. Elena thought for a moment. "The kind who doesn't leave people behind. The kind who does what needs to be done without being asked. The kind who makes everyone around them better." The barracks was quiet for a long moment. Then Johnson spoke. "Mission accomplished, Marquez." 6 months later, at graduation, Elena stood with her platoon as they received their assignments. She'd finished second in her class academically and first in tactical evaluations. Lieutenant Parker approached her after the ceremony. "Airborne school, then Ranger assessment. Your father would be proud. Elena nodded, fingering the unit patch on her new uniform. Her father's old unit, where she'd been assigned based purely on merit. Sir, can I ask you something? Shoot. Do you think legacy is something you inherit or something you build? Parker smiled. Based on what I've observed over the past 6 months, I'd say it's something you choose to carry forward, but only if you make it your own first. As Elena packed her gear for the next phase of training, she carefully placed the wooden plaque from her fellow soldiers in her kit bag. Some legacies were inherited. Others were earned. The best ones she'd learned were both. Comment respect if you believe that sometimes the strongest legacy isn't what's told in stories, but what's quietly passed forward through actions. And don't forget to subscribe to HL Stories for more inspiring content.